Hello, and welcome to this webinar on data protection services of Google Cloud. It's just about on the hour, so people still joining. So let's wait for 2 more minutes and then we'll head off. All right, everyone, it's 2 past the hour in my time zone, so let's head it off. Welcome again to our webinar on data protection services, this time for Google Cloud. My name is Pieter Verreken. I'm a solutions architect team lead dedicated for the VCSP team or service provider team. And I'm here joined by my colleague Patricio. Patricio, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Patricio Cerda, Senior Solution Architect for Veeam, and I'm a specialist in Kubernetes and also in Google Cloud.
Thanks. Yeah, that sounds good. Specialist for Google Cloud, just what we need, right, for this webinar. Excellent. Thanks again for joining us, Patricia. So the agenda for today, we will talk a little bit about the modern data protection, right? So why you actually need to protect the data in Google Cloud. Then Patricia will go over the architecture, right? And probably it will not be in the exact order, but it's more like the topics that we will touch on. So we will talk on the architecture, how you should deploy it. We will discuss sizing options, right? How many CPUs, memory, storage, this kind of things. And along everything, we will mention some best practices as well. And we'll also mention some resources out there where you can find more of the best practices, specifically for public cloud, specifically for Google, right? So this is the last webinar in a series of 3 webinars, right? It's definitely not the last webinar that we are going to do, but it is the third one. So the first one we had was a couple of weeks ago, was on AWS. Then we had another one on Azure, and this is the one for Google Cloud, right? As you can see, the dates when they were is published on the screen. Recordings of these webinars are available on propartner.veeam.com. And this is also the place where this webinar will be located, right? So this webinar is also recorded, and the presentation and the recording afterwards you will either receive via email, but it will be available through propartner.veeam.com, right? So first of all, hybrid infrastructure, right? So every year we do this survey. So if you want to know more about this, then on the bottom left, you can find the link to the Data Protection Trends Report for 2023. And every year we go out there to our customers and we do some kind of form. Right? And then we ask them some questions. So again, the question, what do you estimate is your organization's percentage of servers in each of the following formats currently, right? And in 2 years' time, right? So you can clearly see some difference between when we first started asking this question in 2020 and then let's say for this year, right, 2023. So we can see that the amount of physical servers is declining, right? We can see even some of the virtual machines declining, right? So this might be because a lot of customers out there today do not longer want to manage their own infrastructure, right? So they want to actually just focus on their business, but maybe they want to outsource all of the IT or a part of the IT to some third party, right? So for the companies that do have the knowledge out there, for example, to architect an infrastructure, they maybe move to a hyperscaler such as Google Cloud, but this could also just be a clear shift towards a service provider, right? Towards an MSP, managed service provider. So this could be one of you, right? A Veeam Cloud and service provider who are actually taking on those physical servers and virtual machines from the customers, from your customers, and put them in your data center, right? So there is definitely a clear shift visible, right? Now, when we move data into the cloud, well, that is, first of all, pretty popular, right? Migration to and adoption of the public cloud is very popular, definitely in the last decade. Yeah, who of us hasn't actually played with one of the hyperscalers? I think everybody has already touched on one of those 3 for sure. Yeah, and that's all great. But what not everybody realizes is that even though the data is in the cloud, it has to be protected, right? The cloud hosted data it doesn't protect itself. Yeah? Because regardless, let's be honest, how well this environment has been architected, you always have to think about a disaster might happen at any moment, at any point in time. And then the question that the customer needs to ask themselves is, okay, so what happens if I lose my data? Yeah? What happens to my business if I cannot recover within 24 hours or 3 days or 7 days? And do I have everything protected? Can I recover completely? Yeah? So those are generally very interesting discussions when you go and talk to a customer to see what their reaction is about this, right? Because many of us know about the shared responsibility model, but they don't really fully realize that there is some action for themselves to take, right? So eventually they found out that, oh yeah, it seems that the data that I'm putting in it, I should also protect it myself, right? It's not part for the cloud service provider or for the hyperscaler, right? But then again, this is something that you as a Veeam Cloud and Service provider, you could take part of for your customer, right? So you could take away this responsibility and sell it as a service to your customer, right? So also the next part is that, yeah, snapshots, right? So a lot of customers still think, hey, I have this option here and I need to protect. So I'll just use some snapshots, right? And okay, let's be honest, snapshots, they do have a time and place in data protection. Everybody knows the snapshots on the VMware environment or Hyper-V environment, for example, right? It's just great when you're about to do an update or launch some changes to your application. You just quickly snapshot it and then you implement your change. If it doesn't work, you revert to the snapshots and off we go. So it's very flexible. It offers us better incredibly low RPO and RTOs. When there is an outage, we can resume with minimal operation. But then again, this is definitely not backup, right? And why, right? First of all, security. Yeah. Patricio, if you could back one slide. Yep, thanks. So first of all, security, right? So snapshots aren't independently stored of the data that is protecting, right? Generally, a snapshot just sits next to the virtual machine or to the resource that you are trying to protect. And these days, a lot of customers are thinking about protecting their infrastructure, protecting their account. So where the workloads are running, it's definitely not the place I would like to put my backups, so to call, right? Snapshots in this case. I don't want to put them in the same place, right? So I want to architect some kind of infrastructure where I can have a production environment and I have a backup environment, right? And with snapshots, that's just not possible, right? Then recovery, well, recovery is obviously the reason why we back up. Yeah, still, very many customers are focused on backing up and backing up super fast, and that's all cool. But in the end, what we need to do is we need to restore, right? We need to recover super fast. And definitely when it comes to a ransomware attack, for example, or where you get hacked and some of your data gets deleted, you want to be able to restore as fast as you can, right? You don't want to just sit and wait for 1 week for your employees to just sit there and wait or go on vacation while things are being restored. You want to be up and running because this is costing you money, right? So, and as you can see, 82% still of the organizations have this availability gap, right? Which means it is like a gap between how fast their boss needs them to recover, right? So recover right now versus how fast they actually can recover because they don't have the right tools in place, right? And then the last thing is hybrid. What organization is not hybrid these days? Yeah, most of the organizations we speak to, they either have something on premises and work with one or multiple public clouds, right? And then again, snapshots are limited to just a single platform. So if I work in, let's say, 3 hyperscalers, I'm going to use 3 types of solutions, 3 snapshot types in each of these hyperscaler, right? So it doesn't really scale very well, right? So it also means I need to manage multiple backup solutions. Again, this is quite costly, right, when it comes to management. different features in all of the things. So yeah, it's good if you have a tool that can cover all of those, right? So then shared responsibility model, right? So this is an example for the shared responsibility model for Google, right? I think we've discussed this already many times, and in the end, many of you are familiar with, well, when you have it on premises, you're responsible for everything, right? Or maybe service provider is taking part of your IT under his responsibility. When it comes to infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, things tend to change a little bit. But what they all have in common is that the cloud provider is responsible for the infrastructure uptime, but the data is always the responsibility of the customer, right? That's just plain simple. Always. You still need backup in this part. So then when it comes to backup, well, data protection has never been more complex, right? And of course, you can have very easy tools, but then again, if you need to back up something on premises, right? You need to back up something in the cloud, in more than one hyperscaler, then it requires expertise, right? Do you have the expertise on Google, Azure, AWS, Kubernetes, on-premises infrastructure, networking, storage, right? That's quite a lot of things to know, right? Do I have people who actually can manage this, right? And this also requires some budget because I need to spend in different places, different budgets, different people, right? And in the end, it also requires a lot of time to maintain this and to also back up all of this, right? So as a customer, is this still something that I want to completely take ownership of, right? And be in charge of all of these different items? Or do I just go to a service provider and pay a fee per month, per year, or whatever you agree, basically, right? You as a service provider and your customer, and then let the customer take care of their own business, right? Focus on the business and let the service provider or managed service provider take care of the IT or just the data protection, right? So this is much more cost effective for the customer. And in the end, you are the trusted advisor. You are the expert right here. Right? And then last but not least, next slide, please. Yep. And last but not least, in the end, we also have the cloud mobility part, right? So, and this is also very important, is that with Veeam, you have the freedom of choice, right? So you could today sit on a on-premises environment with VMware, Hyper-V, Nutanix, and at some point you decide some workloads are perfectly fitting into one of the hyperscalers, right? Or even in your service provider environment. Well, then feel free to do so, right? We can back up those on-premises environments and we can restore them to the public cloud, or we can onboard them onto your service provider environment, right? So the freedom of choice is there. And also, this provides a great exit strategy because no matter where the workload is located, we can back it up and we can then move it to any of the other places. So let's say that you're working today in AWS, something is not right, you want to move it to Google Cloud, you have the option with Veeam, right? You can back it up, you can restore it, you can even go back to on-premises, right? So there's a lot of portability and recovery options here between all of the on-premises and cloud, right? So a lot, very easy actually to do lots of migrations, right? So these tools make it very easy for the customer, especially for the service provider who has to take care of all of this. And when it comes to licensing, right, because licensing always comes into the picture as well, the license just follows you, right? So no matter the workload, Veeam licensing or universal licenses, hence the word universal, you can just back up, let's say, VMware VMs today, and tomorrow you're backing up some instances in Google Cloud, and you can just use the same license, right? But enough about that. So let's go into the more technical, interesting part. So for that, I hand it over to Patricio.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, now we're going to talk about the Veeam backup for Google Cloud specifically. But let's talk how it works. Veeam backup for Google Cloud, specifically also for service provider. We're going to explain some design options, best practices, and also how to size the solution. So first, let's discuss about how Veeam Backup for Google Cloud works. Veeam provide cloud-native solutions to backup and recovery workloads running in AWS, in Azure, and also, of course, in Google Cloud. We're going to focus, of course, in this case, in Google Cloud for backup and recovery cloud-native workloads. So these cloud-native solutions also offer migration or disaster recovery options. Peter already mentioned the freedom of choice, the possibility of cloud mobility. So I can restore my Google Cloud virtual machines in this case in another cloud provider like AWS, Azure, or even on premises. Okay, so we're going to explain these options also during this session. By using external repository in VBR, I can connect directly to the cloud storage bucket used as a repository by Veeam Backup for Google Cloud to create backup copies. So I can have a backup copy from the my cloud workloads also on premises, and also to migrate workloads from Google Cloud to on premises or to a different cloud provider. Finally, finally, we have capacity tier. Capacity tier is a Veeam backup and replication feature, which of course can consume Google Cloud Storage and other object storage solutions, of course, to move or copy my on-premises backup to a cloud provider. Okay, so these are the native options we have for Google Cloud, for Azure, and for AWS. So how does Veeam Backup for Google Cloud works? So in this case, we're going to focus first in how the solution works. Then we're going to see how this fit in a service provider model. So we have the production project here, maybe with virtual machines, with Cloud SQL instances. Right now, we support a native backup for MySQL and also for PostgreSQL running on Google Cloud. So we can have a separated project for backups. This is optional, okay? Usually it's considered a best practice, so we can separate the components from production and backup components, okay? But this is optional. We can have everything in the same project. This also has an impact in the design options for service provider, which is, of course, is going to be discussed later. So here, we're going to deploy the Veeam Backup for Google Cloud appliance. This appliance can be deployed from the marketplace. You can automate this also using Terraform or other automation solution. We're going to provide cloud storage buckets for backups. We can use the standard one for the short-term backups and archive type for GFS, for weekly backups, monthly backups, yearly backups, and so on. And the last component is the worker. The worker is going to process the backups when we send the backup to the cloud storage. It's going to be responsible to get the data from the source. It's going to compress the data. As an option, it's going to encrypt the data, and it's going to send the data to the cloud storage. The workers, if you're familiar with Veeam Backup and Replication, are very similar to a Veeam Backup proxy. But the workers are temporary appliances. They are not running all the time. They're going to run every time you run a backup policy or a restore operation. Okay, and you're going to need one worker per every workload you are going to backup or restore in parallel. So if you're going to backup 4 virtual machines in the same policy, Veeam is going to deploy 4 workers, 1 per virtual machine. Okay. So how the backup works? First, for virtual machines, Veeam is going to take a snapshot of every virtual disk. This snapshot, from this snapshot, Veeam is going to create a new persistent disk, and the persistent disk is going to be mounted in the worker. Okay, the worker is going to read the data from this persistent disk. It's going to compress, encrypt, and so on, and send the data to the cloud storage standard. Okay, for Cloud SQL is very similar. For Cloud SQL, we can read the data directly from the Cloud SQL database using also the workers. As an option, we can also create a staged database copy. So basically, during the backup operation, Veeam is going to create a stage database copy, and the workers are going to read the data from this stage database copy and send the backup to the cloud storage. Okay, the stage database is just an option. You can backup directly from the database, the production database, but of course, this can reduce the risk of any potential performance issue in your production environment. And finally, we can send all their restore points, monthly, weekly, yearly backups to Cloud Storage Archive to reduce the cost because it's a cheaper solution. Okay, so overall, this is how Veeam Backup for Google Cloud works. Now, we can also integrate Google Cloud, Veeam Backup for Google Cloud with Veeam Backup and Replication in case you have a hybrid environment or a multi-cloud environment. So in this case, let's say we have also our own data center with Veeam Backup and Replication. Okay, so I can connect Veeam Backup and Replication with Veeam Backup for Google Cloud. So Veeam Backup and Replication is going to have visibility with the cloud storage used as a backup repository. Because of that, first, I can create a backup copy of this of the backups I have in Google Cloud, which is also very good for immutability purposes, because right now we cannot offer native immutability in Google Cloud Storage, basically because Google Cloud right now doesn't offer object lock feature for the cloud storage. So unfortunately, because of that, we cannot offer immutability. But because we can backup, we can create a backup copy in other storage solution, on-prem or in the cloud, using Veeam Backup Replication. This third copy could be immutable. Okay, so we can offer immutability anyway. From here, we can also have an instant VM recovery. It means one of these virtual machines in Google Cloud was protected by Veeam Backup for Google Cloud appliance. I have the backup in the cloud storage, and from this cloud storage, I can restore directly to on-prem. Veeam is going to make all the transformations to make this virtual machine run, for instance, in vSphere. Right? I can run a full recovery from the on-prem repository. If I already have a backup copy in the on-prem repository, I can also restore from there. Okay, not just from the Google Cloud Storage. Maybe the Google Cloud Storage is not available for any reason. I can restore also from the copy. And finally, because all this mobility we already talked a lot, we can restore this Google Cloud backup directly to AWS or Azure if you want to. Okay, so you have freedom of choice. You can move to another cloud provider anytime, and with Veeam Backup Application, we can migrate these workloads. Okay, so for different use cases, to go into more details about all the options I already mentioned, we have, of course, the native backups for Google Cloud. Here, as you can see, we have the appliance, we have the object storage, I have the Google Cloud virtual machines, the compute engine instances, the snapshots, and the backup in the object storage. This appliance is connected with the Veeam Backup and Application server, which is running on-prem or in the service provider premises for management reasons. So you can manage this appliance also from Veeam Backup and Application. Now, because of this integration between Veeam Backup and Application and the Veeam Backup for Google Cloud Appliance, the object storage, okay, let me show you this. This object storage is going to be visible for Veeam Backup Application as an external repository. Because of that, I can run an instant recovery on-prem directly from the object storage. So I can recover my Google Cloud virtual machine directly on premises in vSphere, for instance. Okay, and that is one of the options. As I already mentioned, you can run a backup copy. Also, thanks to this integration between Veeam Backup Replication and Veeam Backup for Google Cloud. Okay, so we can create a different Veeam Backup repository, which could be an on-prem storage, block storage, or object storage, could be a cloud-based object storage, maybe AWS S3, anything compatible with Veeam Backup Replication. So we can create a copy, a backup copy. This backup copy is managed and initiated by VBR, by Veeam Backup Replication. Okay, this is not a Veeam Backup for Google Cloud responsibility. It's a Veeam Backup Replication responsibility. And from this copy, from this on-prem copy, we can restore on-prem with a full VM recovery. Okay, instant VM recovery, full recovery, I can do both by using this third copy. And of course, I can restore from this third copy directly to Google Cloud. So if for any reason this backup, this is Google Cloud storage bucket is not available, I still have my on-prem copy, and I can restore directly to Google Cloud if I need to. And the last one, remember, you can restore, you can move your workloads from a different cloud provider to Google Cloud or vice versa. In this case, I have AWS backups using Veeam Backup for AWS, right? And using Veeam Backup and Replication integrated with Veeam Backup for AWS, I can restore the backups directly to Google Cloud. So Veeam Backup and Replication has visibility to the S3 bucket with all the backups. And Veeam Backup Replication is going to connect with Google Cloud to restore this virtual machine directly as a compute engine instance in Google Cloud. Okay, so this is how Veeam works. Now, how we can use this as a service provider? How let's see what are the options for service providers. So this is a high-level diagram of the solution. We're going to go into details, of course, in the next couple of slides. We have the tenant project with Google Cloud workloads, and we can deploy Veeam Backup for Google Cloud, right? We can have Google Cloud storage in the same or different region. Later, we're going to explain the best practices. We can have an offsite backup in the service provider infrastructure, right? And also, we can have an offsite backup in the customer side, in the tenant side, okay? So what are the main benefits for service providers using this model? First, no upfront costs. You pay only for the licenses consumed by the customer, by the tenant. It's cloud native, using agentless backup and recovery built specifically for the public cloud, in this case for Google Cloud. Cost calculation, so you can have a forecast of the spending and avoid unexpected expenses. And automation, you can fully manage and automate the entire solution via REST APIs. For the customer, the main benefits are they can focus 100% on the business and the business needs, and let the service provider take care of the rest, take care of the backups and all the disaster recovery operations. Data portability, we already mentioned. By using Veeam solutions, we can easily move data across any supported environment for migration, for disaster recovery, or for compliance purposes. So if you need to move from Google Cloud to another cloud provider, you can do that using Veeam. And ransomware protection, okay? We can provide ransomware protection in the case of Google Cloud. Of course, we don't have native support for immutability, but using the service provider model, you can provide an immutable copy of the backup in the service provider cloud. Okay, so there is two main design options for service providers. The first one is the pod architecture. The high-level idea here is The pod design is to create a dedicated management infrastructure per customer. A pod is just a set of Veeam backup for Google Cloud components deployed in a specific account, in this case, as you can see in the tenant account, to protect only the data of this tenant. Okay, so these components are dedicated per tenant. You can see the Veeam backup for Google Cloud Appliance. We have the buckets, the workers, dedicated per tenant. Okay, so as a service provider, you can deploy multiple pods for multiple tenants. All protected data can be managed through Veeam Backup Application. Okay, all pods, all protected data from public clouds, in this case from Google Cloud, is going to be visible in the Veeam Backup and Replication console. There is no real limitation on the number of pods you can deploy and manage from Veeam Backup and Replication. Okay, and this amount won't affect the license consumption. The licenses are always just based in the protected workloads. Okay, so in this case, in the service provider environment, you can have Veeam Backup and Replication, and you can manage the every Google Cloud appliance, every pod from Veeam Backup and Replication using the Google Cloud plugin. Okay. At this moment, there is no direct integration with the Veeam Service Provider console, but of course, you could have Veeam Backup, the Veeam Service Provider console to manage other solutions like Veeam Backup for AWS or for Microsoft Azure. So, what are the pros and cons for this model? This pod design is a good choice when the requirement is to share the full access to the appliance, basically to provide self-service. So you can provide access for the tenant. Okay, so the tenant can access to the appliance. It's going to be able to access to all the protected data. Okay, the storage buckets can be deployed in any region, anytime. It depends on customer requirements. It's very flexible because remember, every pod is dedicated for every tenant, and you can use role-based access control in Google Veeam Backup for Google Cloud. So the tenant can have access to the appliance, but just maybe to manage backup policies for restore operations and nothing more. Not able to change the appliance configuration, for instance, repositories, workers, permissions, and so on. Maybe the only cons is everything is under one project, one appliance per tenant. Okay, but in general, this model is very flexible because it's going to be dedicated for every customer, and you can accommodate every customer requirements using this pod model. The other option is to use a shared access architecture. The core idea here of this kind of design is to provide a fully managed backup service for customers. In this case, a service provider is going to host and manage all the Veeam backup infrastructure for customer cloud workloads. Okay, and all the backup and recovery operations will run in the service provider project. So as you can see here, we can have multiple tenants for multiple projects for multiple tenants. And we have a project for the service provider. In the service provider project, we're going to deploy the Veeam components. Okay, you can see here, we can have an individual Google Cloud storage bucket per tenant. That is a best practice, of course, to separate the data per tenant. And as you can see here, a single Veeam backup for Google Cloud Appliance for multiple tenants. Okay, the workers not really important. Remember that the workers are going to be created on demand every time you run a backup job or a restore operation. The most important for the worker is the location of the worker. We're going to discuss that in the next section. Okay. Again, you can manage everything from Veeam Backup and Replication using the Google Cloud plugin. You have access to the appliance using a browser, of course, But in general, you are not going to share the access to the appliance with the tenants. Remember, this is going to be a fully managed solution. Everything is going to be managed by the service provider itself. So all the backups and restore are going to be managed by the service provider. The bills for backup and recoveries are covered by the service provider project, fully independent from the tenant. So you take care of everything. Okay, everything is under service provider control. The main cons here is the self-service operations basically is not available. Okay, because remember, the appliance is a shared appliance. The Veeam Backup appliance is only one for multiple tenants, unless you decide to create one appliance per tenant. But in that case, basically you're moving to a pod design, right? So in this case, customer, they don't have access to the appliance. Maybe you can think you can use role-based access control. Yes, but the problem is with role-based access control, you can restrict which operation a tenant can perform in the appliance, but you cannot specify the scope of the protected data where they have access. Okay, remember, the appliance is going to manage the backups for multiple tenants. If any user is, even if you have real only access, when you have access to the appliance, you're going to be able to see all the backups for all the tenants. We cannot control that using role-based access control in Veeam Backup for Google Cloud. So as a general rule, in this case, we don't provide self-service operations for the Veeam Backup for Google Cloud appliance. The last section is about sizing. Okay, here we're going to describe some sizing options, how to size different components, some considerations, and so also some best practices. This is going to be basically a summary of the sizing recommendation. Remember, we have the best practice guide for service providers, the best practice guide for cloud solutions with Veeam. So all this information is public, but still I'm going to explain some of the most important parts of this, the most critical part in any sizing for Veeam Backup for Google Cloud. So of course, you need to size the Veeam Backup for Google Cloud appliance, the workers, and the Google Cloud storage. Veeam Backup application also should be properly sized if you're going to integrate Veeam Backup application with Veeam Backup for Cloud appliance, okay, for Google Cloud. As an option, you can also size object storage or block storage for backup copies. Remember, you can create a backup copy using Veeam Backup application, and also the data movers for backup copy and cross-cloud recovery. Those basically are virtual appliance, which also should be properly sized. But in this case, we're going to focus specifically on Veeam Backup for Google Cloud components, the appliance, the workers, and the storage. So for the appliance, here you can see the details about how much CPU or memory you need. I'm not going into details here. The size, of course, it depends on how many workloads you want to protect. The most important part here is the appliance not only is going to take care of backup and recovery operations, also is going to be responsible of applying the retention policy. So every time you run the backup job, after the backup job is complete, Veeam needs to check all the restore points and remove any unnecessary restore point, any older restore point. That process could be long if we are protecting a large VM, for instance. If you're going to protect a VM of more than 10 terabytes, the backup itself could take several hours, and then Veeam is going to process the retention policy. It's going to run some merge operations too. That could take also several hours. Eventually, the retention policy could, the retention policy process could overlap with the next execution of the backup policy. So if it's, I don't know, 1 a.m., and I need to run the backup policy again automatically, but the retention policy process is still running, the backup policy is not going to run. Okay, Veeam is going to skip one of these tasks, which is not good, of course. So in those cases, it's recommended to increase the size of the appliance. You can change the appliance size anytime after it's deployed. Of course, you need to shut down the VM, the appliance, and change the size using one of these options here in the slide. Of course, you cannot put any size. You have to choose one of these sizes. And also, you can delegate the retention policy process to the worker instance. Okay, so the worker is going to process the retention policy process, and it's not going to impact the backup operations. For the workers, also we have different sizes. In general, it's going to use the primary size for every backup and restore operation. Okay, the secondary size is just used when you don't have enough disk quota in your project. Why is this necessary? Because it's very important here to highlight that every worker appliance deployed during a backup or restore operation will be created with a total disk size of at least 4 terabytes. So if you're running a backup of a 100 gigabytes VM, the worker is going to add more disk space to have at least 4 terabyte disk. Okay. The reason why is because in Google Cloud, the throughput you have in a virtual machine depends on the disk size. The best throughput can be reached with a disk of at least 4 terabytes. Okay. If you're going to protect, I don't know, a 5 terabyte VMs, of course, the worker is going to be created with a 5 terabyte disk. No need for extra disk at all. But if it's a small VM, be aware that the worker always is going to have a 4 terabyte disk at least, right? For every backup and restore operation. Be careful in case you have any disk quota in your Google Cloud project, because if Veeam is not able to create the worker, the entire operation is going to fail. Almost done. The last part is the worker placement. Basically, where the worker should be created. This is by default, but it's important you understand. So because this, of course, is going to impact the throughput. For every backup operation, the worker is going to be as close as possible to the source data. In this case, we have all the production environment in region A, the cloud storage in region B. The workers are going to be always in region A because it's close to the source data, because the source data is not processed yet, it's not compressed. Okay, so all the information is going to be read by the workers. Then, of course, the worker is going to compress the data, and the compressed data is going to travel through the network to a different region. So it's not going to consume so much bandwidth, right? So that's why it's as close as possible to the source data. Same happened with the Cloud SQL backups, with a minor difference between PostgreSQL and MySQL. For PostgreSQL, the worker is also created in the source region, in the same region as the PostgreSQL instance, and it's going to send the backup to the cloud storage. For MySQL, it's a bit different because the backup process is a bit different in this case. Veeam is going to ask, is going to communicate with the Cloud SQL using the cloud native features. Google Cloud is going to create a database dump. It's going to extract the data, and it's going to copy that data in a temporary subdirectory in the cloud storage, in the bucket, right? That is going to be done directly by Google Cloud. Veeam is just going to ask for this. And then Veeam is going to create the worker. But in this case, the worker is going to be in region B, because I'm going to read the data from this temporary copy of the data. And then, of course, the data is going to be sent to the cloud storage. So you can see where the worker should be located. For restore operations, is just the same, okay? Same locations, actually. if you want to restore a virtual machine, the workers are going to be created in the same region as the destination for the restore virtual machine. Okay, in this case, the data is going to travel from one region to another. Already, of course, is compressed. Then the data is going to be decompressed. Is going to be these snapshots are going to be created. From here, then the persistent disk and the virtual machines are going to be restored. Same happens for databases. For Cloud SQL, the worker is going to be created in the same region as the target instance. For MySQL, remember, it's a bit different. So Veeam is going to create the worker in the region B. Here, a temporary subdirectory is going to be created with a dump, right? And then this dump is going to be used to restore the data to Cloud SQL. Okay, so it's a bit different. And of course, when the backup or restore operation is complete, all the workers are removed. Finally, for Google Cloud Storage, remember, the sizing is the basic sizing. The general requirement is basically 50% of the source data. So if I need to back up 10 terabytes, roughly you're going to have 5 terabytes of backup, for instance. Of course, it depends on the compression rate, and the compression depends heavily on the type and structure of source data, and of course could change. Okay, so be careful with that, but roughly 50% of the source data. The storage bucket, if you're concerned about performance, the storage bucket should be located in the same region as the source data, as the source virtual machine. But the problem is, of course, the disaster recovery. What if the region is down? My virtual machine and also my bucket is going to be down. So for disaster recovery purposes, maybe a bucket in a different region could be a good idea. Okay, of course, maybe the performance is not going to be exactly the best, but that should be tested. Okay, because it's a better idea to have the bucket in a different location, in a different region. You can have a backup cost calculation when you're creating a backup policy in Veeam Backup for Google Cloud. So you can see beforehand, you can know beforehand how much it's going to cost this policy itself for snapshots, for backup, the traffic, transactions, and so on. Okay. Peter?
Yes, excellent stuff. Thank you, Patricio. This was very interesting. And yeah, it's a bit a lot to digest, right? But
Yes.
lots of good information. So, as Patricio mentioned earlier, all of this information is also publicly available on our best practices site, right? Which is bp.veeam.com. And we have a dedicated one for public cloud, so just for the public cloud appliances in general. And this one that you're seeing right here on the screen, /SP from service provider, is dedicated with the scenarios on how to design, build, and operate the public cloud data protection services for you as a service provider, right? So if you want to know more about how to design this one for Google Cloud, for example, then all the diagrams, all the information on how you could set up the service and design and what's best and what's not so good to do, all this information is written right there. So, and if you have any comments as well, always feel free to talk to your Veeam pre-sales engineer. We're always looking for more information because in the end, the best practices comes from you guys from the field, right? So with that said, we came to the end of our session here. So we hope this was very interesting, very useful for you. I know that for me, it was definitely a good one to look at. So if there are any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A pane or put them in the chat. Yeah, and then we'll hang just around for a couple of more minutes and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much. Thanks again, Patricio.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, it seems that there's no additional questions, so then we can just wrap it up here. Okay, thanks again, everyone. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.